Welcome to Myth Madness. This season is going to focus on Persian mythology. Up until now, I've mostly focused on Greek mythology. I covered the creation myths, the gods, and many stories about Greek heroes. I tried to do this in a more or less chronological way, starting with creation and covering several generations of heroes until ending just before the beginning of the Trojan War. I decided to do Persian. It's a mythology that a lot of people aren't familiar with. And like what I did with the Greek hero myths, Persian mythology can be arranged as a series of stories about legendary kings and heroes over several generations. So, as I cover those Persian stories over the course of this season, that will be the same general structure. While the structure should seem familiar, the overall feel of Persian mythology is very different from Greek. If you already know a fair amount about Greek mythology, or you've listened to the past episodes, you probably noticed the Greek myth is full of people who just aren't very nice. There are gods that behave badly, there's humans who behave badly, and yet the gods are still worshipped and respected. The heroes are still celebrated. Why? Well, in ancient Greek myth, which has its roots in the Bronze Age Mycenaean Greek civilization that existed over 3,000 years ago, there isn't really a moral system based on good and evil like what we are more familiar with today. There is a moral system, though. There is the natural order provided by Zeus and the other gods, and then there is whatever goes against that order. That's why in Greek myth, we can perceive the Titans when they are fighting against the gods, Typhon when he is trying to destroy the gods, and also humans when they offend the gods, as bad. In Greek myth, instead of good versus evil, it's more order versus anarchy, and the system that upholds order might not be that great for everyone, but it is apparently better than any alternative. But in Persian mythology, there is an overarching theme of good versus evil. One side has truth, wisdom, and righteousness, and the other has lies, wickedness, and suffering. And in Persian mythology, these two sides are always at war. The result is that Persian myth might feel less like Greek and more like the Lord of the Rings. But first, let's back up a bit and set the stage by talking about some history. Throughout this season, I will use the terms Persia and Iran fairly interchangeably, although technically Iran is the more accurate term. The word Persia comes from the Greeks, and was used to refer to a handful of empires that popped up over the last few thousands of years, mainly centered on the mountainous plateau region in what is now the modern country of Iran. The Persian or Iranian civilization has roots that go back over 3,000 years ago. At that time, the land that makes up the Iranian plateau, and the surrounding areas of Central Asia to the north and east, was home to many different but interrelated tribes. The nomadic Iranians moved throughout southern Central Asia. We know a large number of them moved into what is now western and southwestern Iran by the 800s BC, because the ancient Assyrians in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, talk about them in their records. The Iranian Medes established a powerful kingdom in the 600s BC that lasted until the 550s BC. At that point, in an area called Pars, or Perses, in southwestern Iran, a local leader named Kurush, known more commonly as Cyrus the Great, rebelled against his Median overlords, took over their empire, and founded his own, the First Persian Empire. It's often called the Achaemenid Persian Empire today, after Cyrus's family name, and its leaders conquered the Middle East, Egypt, and large parts of Central Asia, becoming the largest empire the world had seen at that point. All of the different Iranian empires that followed would try and lay claim to this Persian legacy in some way. Starting 3,000 years ago, these centuries were a time of great upheaval. The tribes continuously warred against each other. Kingdoms like the Medes rose and fell. Rulers were cruel. The people were poor. At various times, many people probably thought the gods had abandoned them. Likely just before 1000 BC, give or take a few hundred years in either direction, no one really knows for sure, and somewhere likely in what is now eastern Iran or Afghanistan, but no one really knows for sure, a man named Zarathustra had a revelation. Zarathustra, or Zoroaster as he is widely known in the Western world today, was likely a member of the priest class of his society, so he would have been no stranger to the inner workings of ancient Iranian religion. According to Zarathustra, while he attended a spring festival, a spirit appeared and introduced itself as a messenger from Ahura Mazda, one of his people's gods. Ahura Mazda's messenger said the priests were wrong. Most of the gods were not helpful to humanity. There was only one, Ahura Mazda, who was truly a force for good. Some of the other gods were good spirits subordinate to Ahura Mazda, but the rest were fickle, devious, and most importantly, not worthy of being worshipped by humans. They were demons trying to deceive unsuspecting mortals away from the truth of Ahura Mazda and towards the lies of the evil spirit Angra Mainyu. Naturally, Zarathustra's vision did not make him popular with his people's existing authority figures. He was forced to leave home. He did eventually find a patron who converted to his new interpretation, and it grew from there. Today, his teachings are known as Zoroastrianism, and it is a religion still practiced today. Originally, his teachings were communicated orally, but eventually written down in the Avesta. This Avesta is not a single holy book like the Christian Bible or the Muslim Quran. It is actually a collection of sacred texts, written in an ancient Iranian language called Avestan, that was spoken in the time of Zarathustra. Some important Avestan texts include the Gathas, a collection of hymns apparently composed by Zarathustra himself, the Vendidad, which talks about spiritual pollution and purification, and the Yashts, a series of hymns dedicated to various gods, not just Ahura Mazda. While the Avesta originated as an oral tradition, the oldest parts of it were likely finalized in written script around 1000 BC, and the younger sections around 550 BC. Zarathustra provided the key theme of good versus evil to Persian mythology, but he did not create the mythology from scratch. His teachings can be thought of as a radical reinterpretation of what the ancient Iranians already had. They already had stories about their gods and heroes. Unfortunately, we only have the vaguest of clues of what these might have been. We don't really know when Zarathustra began preaching his revamp of the ancient Iranian religion, or how quickly it spread through the vast lands the ancient Iranians occupied. The Medes may have followed Zarathustra's teachings about Ahura Mazda. They may have still practiced what came earlier, or they may have followed some variation that was not quite Zoroastrian. We really have no idea, and there is no scholarly consensus. However, we do know that by the time the Achaemenid Persian Empire stretched from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas, Zarathustra's teachings had also spread across the Iranian lands and become the state religion. Darius the Great, one of Cyrus's successors, carved many inscriptions across the empire that stressed his special relationship with the god Ahura Mazda. And yet, all that changed when Alexander the Great led his Macedonian army out of Greece in 334 BC and defeated the Persian army in a series of battles. Eventually, he made his way to Persepolis. This was the site of the Persian king's palace, which Alexander looted and burned down. The First Persian Empire was no more, and unfortunately, the palace also had an extensive library. It likely housed early Zoroastrian texts and maybe records of ancient Iranian myths, which are now lost to history. After Alexander, the Persians were ruled by Greeks for the next 200 years. But by 130 BC, the ruler of Parthia had expanded his kingdom to cover much of the old Persian Empire. The Parthians were another Iranian people, like Cyrus's Persians, but the Parthians lived further east in what is now northeastern Iran and southern Turkmenistan. While the capital of their new empire would move around, their power base would always be in the east. This was very important, as even though the Parthian Empire later became an opponent of the Roman Empire, the Parthians often dealt with invasions of nomadic tribes from Central Asia. The Parthian Empire lasted approximately 400 years. Greek cultural influence remained, but there was also a revival of Persian art and fashion. Zoroastrianism was likely sponsored by at least some of the Parthian kings, but other Iranian religious practices were widespread too. Mithra, an ancient Iranian god of justice who remained an important figure in Zoroastrianism, was worshipped with bull sacrifices and his own special cult. The ancient Iranian gods were also mixed with some of the Greek gods. Ahura Mazda was often compared to the Greek god Zeus, and Mithra to Apollo. In the end, the Parthian Empire grew weak from repeated wars with Rome in the west, nomadic invasions in the east, and rivalries between noble houses within. One of those noble houses was based in Pars, the same place as the earlier Cyrus. The local ruler, Ardashir, eventually overthrew the Parthians and established another new empire in 224 AD. Its kings referred to itself as Iranshar, Empire of the Iranians, but it is commonly known as the Sassanid Persian Empire today. This marked a high point in Iranian culture. Many elaborate palaces were constructed, and sculptures were carved into the rocks of cliffs across the land. Trade networks blossomed, and the Sassanid Persians even sent trade embassies to China. The vast empire was centralized. At the beginning, official inscriptions were often written in Parthian, Greek, and Pahlavi, a Western Persian language and an earlier form of modern Farsi. Over time, though, the Sassanids phased out Greek and Parthian in favor of Pahlavi. At the same time, numerous literary works were translated into Pahlavi, and scholarship was encouraged by the Sassanid throne. While this centralization was happening in government, a similar process was happening in the area of religion. In the Greek and Parthian periods, there were many different regional variants of Zoroastrianism, and separate cults to specific gods and goddesses spread throughout the land. The Sassanids actively took a different approach. Sassanid kings and high priests sponsored a series of reforms intended to create an orthodox form of Zoroastrianism practiced across the whole empire. Many sacred fire temples were built across the land, and many idols and cult images were removed, even in non-Iranian areas. At times, non-Zoroastrians were even persecuted. This combination of Zoroastrian reforms and Pahlavi scholarship means a lot of major literary texts giving information on Persian mythology were written during this period. The best example is the Zend, a wide collection of commentaries that explain the Avesta's abstract language in more detail. The Zend, like the Avesta, is not a single document, and the commentaries are written in multiple languages and some date to earlier periods. But the Sassanid period saw a large amount of new Zend material being created. Another great example is the Quade Name, or Book of Lords. This one is now lost to history. However, it was supposed to be a long history that told the legends of Iran's ancient kings and heroes. The Sassanid Persian Empire lasted approximately 400 years, and like the Parthians, it spent a large chunk of its time fighting a series of wars with Rome. These wars exhausted the army and treasury, and eventually the Sassanid Empire fell into civil war. Severely weakened, the Sassanids then faced their last external threat, invasions by Muslim Arabs starting in 632 AD. By 651 AD, the Sassanid Empire was gone, and Iran was part of the Rashidun Caliphate. Over the next few centuries, Iranians gradually converted to Islam. In many cases, Zoroastrians were persecuted. A large community of them fled to India. However, in the 800s and 900s AD, many Iranians worked to protect Persian culture while still being Muslim. So, perhaps ironically, when it comes to Persian mythology, the best sources are Zoroastrian texts written in Pahlavi but compiled in the medieval Islamic period. These are the Zadspram, the Bunda-Hishni, and the Denkard. The Zadspram is a text written in the 800s AD that summarizes material from the Avesta. The Bunda-Hishni likely developed gradually, sometime between the Arab conquest of Persia and 1180 AD. Both of them cover stories on the creation of the world, the life of Zarathustra, and some myths about the legendary first rulers of Iran. The Denkard covers much of the same, but also kind of acts as a general encyclopedia on Zoroastrianism. And finally, in 1010 AD, we get something really special. This was the year a man named Abul Qasim Ferdowsi completed his epic poem, the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. He likely started composing the poem in 977 AD. It is one of the longest epic poems in the world and is today one of the most important examples of Iranian literature. It tells a legendary history of Persia. It starts with creation and the doings of the first kings, and then covers stories of successive generations of kings and their heroic champions. After that, it also provides a loose history of Sassanid Persia up to the Arab conquest. Ferdowsi used older material to make his poem, much of it from a very vibrant oral tradition of Persian myths, legends, and fairy tales, and also some written documents that are now lost to history. Many elements of his work can be traced back to the time of Zarathustra, and references to some of the same hero stories can be found in the ancient Avesta. In ancient times, there does not seem to have been much interest in writing these stories down, or if they were not preserved. That changed in the Sassanid period, when books like the Quade-Nameh appeared. In the centuries after the Arab conquest, during a time when people were trying to ensure Persian culture didn't disappear, this effort to write down the stories was kicked into overdrive. In the years afterwards, many poets tried to do the same as Ferdowsi, and so we ended up with an entire genre of epic poems telling the myths of ancient Iranian heroes. In this way, I would describe the Shahnameh as a Persian Iliad. It tells great stories about legendary heroes and is also a work of outlasting cultural significance. Today, some of the Shahnameh stories are popular beyond modern-day Iran, in parts of Central Asia and across the Middle East. Like with the Iliad in the West, it has inspired artists, musicians, and writers. The best source for Persian hero stories is the Shahnameh, and the other epic poems that tie into it. Because the Shahnameh is written in chronological order, it gives me a very useful structure to base this season of Myth Madness off of. So that's what I'm going to do here. Over the course of the season, I'm going to mostly follow the order laid out in the Shahnameh. I'm going to go from generation to generation and tell the stories of the legendary kings and heroes. Along the way, I will bring in stories presented in some of the other Persian epic poems to provide more details that are not in the Shahnameh. But there are several layers to Persian mythology that I also want to touch upon. The oldest layers are the beliefs of the ancient Iranians before and during the time of Zarathustra. And like I mentioned before, many things in the later epics can be traced back to ideas also expressed in the Zoroastrian texts. So, as I cover different topics in the Shahnameh, I will refer back to those too and make some comparisons. This is also the first time I'm covering myths influenced by an ancient religion that is still practiced today, Zoroastrianism. So, public service announcement. For the purposes of this podcast, myths are stories that are used to explain the world but also provide entertainment. They feature gods and heroes as characters. They cover things like the creation of the world, and they take place in a legendary time in the distant past. That's my definition of myth. I am not defining myth as an untrue story. Whether they are true or not, or you believe them or not, is not the point of the podcast. It's not even clear if people like Ferdowsi believed everything he was writing down. Nevertheless, he undoubtedly thought the stories were important, as do I, hence the podcast. Okay, I've covered some history and also described what I want to do with this series of episodes. So let's get to some myths. Since this is the first episode on Persian mythology, I think it makes sense to go to the beginning and talk about the creation of the world and the first human beings. The best sources for this are the Zoroastrian texts the Zadspram and the Bundahishni. I'll pull in what the Shahnameh says at the end of the episode. According to the Zadspram and the Bundahishni, in the beginning there were essentially two parts to the universe, arranged in two layers. These two layers did not touch. Separating them was open space. On top was light, and below was darkness. Within these two light and dark parts, there existed two entities. In the light was Ormazd, the later name for the main Zoroastrian god Ahura Mazda. In the dark part was Ahriman, the later name for Zoroastrianism's ultimate evil spirit, Angra Mainyu. As the Zadspram text later hints, these two beings were possibly not alone, and there were other spirits and things that accompanied them, but I'll leave that detail aside for now. To make understanding things easier, for the rest of this episode and this season of the podcast, I'm always going to use the name Ahriman for the dark spirit. He's only really called Angra Mainyu in the Avesta, and Ahriman in most other sources. Also, Ahriman is just easier to say. The light spirit is a little more complicated. Ahura Mazda is used in the Avesta, and Ormazd in later Zoroastrian religious texts. After the Arab conquest of Persia, Allah is obviously widely used in literature, as well as a bunch of other names too. For the rest of this episode and beyond, I will call this creator Ormazd, because it's easy to differentiate from Ahriman. This name was used during that same period, and it's widely used anyway. Back to the Zadspran. Living in the darkness, Ahriman was not aware of the existence of Ormazd in the other, lighter part of the universe. But Ormazd was, for whatever reason, aware of Ahriman, and he knew he would soon cause chaos and conflict. As it happened, Ahriman moved along the boundary of the dark layer and eventually observed a ray of light. He desired to reach the ray, and made his way to the empty space between the two dark and light halves of the universe. At this point, Ormazd appeared, and using pure words, kept Ahriman away from his area. Ahriman was cast back into the dark gloom from which he came. But Ormazd knew that Ahriman was not destroyed, so he set to work. He created several spiritual entities and appointed these powerful spirits responsibility over the sky, water, earth, plants, animals, and even mankind, so that they would protect creation itself. What does this mean? Well, Ormazd created things that did not have physical forms. Instead, they existed in a spirit state as pure bright white flame. For 3,000 years they remained like this. Zoroastrians refer to this as the world of thought, and it was created before the physical universe. At the same time, over the course of that same 3,000 years, Ahriman, deep in the dark, collected his own forces. But Ahriman is not considered a creator like Ormazd. You can think of it like this. In Zoroastrianism, Ormazd is viewed as a master craftsman. He fashions things. He puts them in their proper place. Ahriman whittles things into existence. His creations are amateurish, unlike those made by Ormazd in the world of thought. At the end of this first 3,000 years, Ahriman returned to the boundary and swore to Ormazd he would destroy him, and destroy all the creatures of his creation, that he would seduce all life away from Ormazd and to himself. The two of them spoke and came to an agreement. They would fight over a series of 3 periods, each being 3,000 years in length. After their deal was settled, Ormazd recited the Ahunvar prayer, an important prayer in Zoroastrianism. This prayer revealed to Ahriman that regardless of the forces he commanded, the lies he told, the tricks he pulled, he would, nonetheless, eventually be defeated. The evil spirit was shocked. He returned to the darkness and entered a deep stupor. With Ahriman gone, Ormazd gave his creations their physical shapes. He created what we in the physical world call the sky, water, and earth. In the ancient Iranian cosmology, the sky enclosed the world like an egg. Water filled the lower half of this egg, and the earth floated on the water in the shape of a flat disk. Within this enclosure, Ormazd also created a single tree, a single bull, a single human man, and fire in all their purest forms. These are basically prototypes of what will come later. Even though this is now a physical creation, Ormazd wasn't done. All of these things were motionless. This changed after Ormazd created time. Finally, knowing his adversary would eventually return, Ormazd placed different parts of his creation under the protection of a group called the Amesha Spenta. These 6 important spirits were likely brought into existence by Ormazd's first ritual sacrifice. They are good thought, best order, well-deserved command, life-giving humility, wholeness, and undyingness. Sometimes their names are translated differently. They are not really gods, but are the most important spirits in Zoroastrianism after Ormazd. There are other spirits too, but they are really only personifications of different abstract concepts. That being said, over the millennia, Zoroastrianism has still recognized a collection of gods. Most are nameless, and most are considered to be false, bad, and in league with Ahriman. But the Avesta does contain references to some ancient Iranian gods, like Mithra, Anahit, and others, who were worshipped before the time of Zarathustra and were still considered helpers of Ormazd. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that we now have a physical creation, and it is filling up with spirits. Ahriman and his own poorly made creations are outside, and Ahriman himself has spent this whole time dazed and confused. However, according to the Bundahishni, unlike their master, Ahriman's demons were busy working. They tried repeatedly to pull him out of his stupor. They were unsuccessful. But that changed when the demon Je arrived at the end of the 3,000-year period. Je is a female demon, one of Ahriman's most powerful followers. She whispered to him about her own evil plans and deeds. She told him to get up. But Ahriman did not move, so she tried again. This time, Ahriman reacted to her message and was delighted with what she had told him. He rose up and kissed Je on the head. From then on, Je would menstruate, and all human females along with her. Yes, in early Zoroastrianism, menstruation was not believed to be natural. It was considered an impure pollution caused by Ahriman. Anyway, to reward her for waking him, Ahriman asked Je what she wished for. She said, "A man is my wish, so give it to me." Apparently before this, Ahriman was in the shape of a large lizard. When he heard Je's request, he took the form of a young 15-year-old man. It is heavily implied here that Je became Ahriman's sexual companion. Listeners may take a pause at Ahriman's age here. Why would the evil spirit appear as a 15-year-old boy? Well, there is a reason for this. For the ancient Iranians, 15 was considered the age a boy became an adult. This is not going to be the first time we hear of 15-year-olds doing things they wouldn't normally do today. In some of the Zoroastrian texts, 15 seems to be treated as the optimal age. After the 3,000-year period passed, Ahriman returned and was intent on entering the physical world. First, he entered the sky, scorching and burning. Then he entered the water, bringing darkness with him. He passed through the earth, like a snake in a hole. The passage he left in his wake became the gateway to hell. Once Ahriman was within creation, he went to the first tree. This prototypical tree did not have branches or bark. When Ahriman appeared, it withered. Next, Ahriman went to the first bull. It became lean, fell trembling, and died. When Ahriman appeared before the first man, Geomart, he fell ill. Finally, Ahriman found pure fire. It did not escape his corruption either. The evil spirit mixed darkness and smoke with it. After that, Ahriman does something which is a little unclear to me. He seems to do something along the lines of splitting the sky into two and surrounding one of the pieces in darkness, making a kind of enclosure for himself within Ormazd's creation. He believed himself victorious. He said, "My victory is complete, for the sky is split and disfigured by me with gloom and darkness, and taken by me as a stronghold. Water is disfigured by me, and the earth, injured by darkness, is pierced by me. Vegetation is withered by me. The bull is put to death by me. Geomart is made ill by me, and no one has remained for me to take and corrupt except Ormazd." But the evil spirit was not victorious. In fact, it seemed Ahriman was tricked. Within his corrupted sky fortress, the sky spirit spoke to him. "Now that you have come in, I will not let you back out." Ormazd prepared another enclosure, a stronger one, around the sky, called Righteous Understanding. Ormazd arranged guardian spirits around it and armed them. They served as prison guards, who watch a prison from outside and would never surrender to an enemy on the inside. Ahriman tried to go back to his original darkness, but could not. He was trapped within Ormazd's creation until the end of time. In Zoroastrianism, Ahriman's attack on creation is called the Assault. The creation myth as a whole basically explains why there are bad things in the world. Once inside, the evil spirit created dangerous animals like snakes, scorpions, anything that bites or has poison. He and his demons introduced greed, want, pain, hunger, disease, lust, and lethargy. For 3,000 years, we have this battle between Ahriman and Ormazd, but the idea is that by allowing Ahriman into creation, Ormazd has guaranteed the evil spirit's eventual defeat. Different religious books of Zoroastrianism hint at other versions of the creation myth. One major one is that there was an even higher supreme being who created Ormazd and Ahriman. This being, named Zurvan, is the god of time. The worshippers of Zurvan were significant in the history of Zoroastrianism, but they were considered heretics. While the prophet Zarathustra taught that Ahura Mazda was the sole creator and that most of the other gods his people believed in were false, as I mentioned already, the Avesta contains vague references to roles played by other divine figures in the conflict between good and evil. These are essentially holdovers from the pre-Zarathustra times and are being recycled, but they do give clues about older myths. The god Mithra may have acted as a mediator between the two spirits. Another group of gods, the Frausi or Fravashi, may have had the job of protecting the world and doing things like causing water to flow, plants to grow, wind to blow, and the sun, moon, and stars to move. In Zoroastrian times, the Fravashi became something like the souls or guardian spirits of all living things. Tistria is another figure mentioned. He caused the first rain to fall, and so divided the world into different continents by filling it with seas. And then there is the weird story of Mami. This guy apparently got Ormazd to create the sun and moon by having sex with his mother and sister. Not much more details are available on that one. The main version of the Zoroastrian creation myth, outlined in the Bundahishni, the Zadspram, and the Denkard, explains how the universe came to be and why the struggle between good and evil is so central to Persian mythology. The Zoroastrian texts also provide details on something else, the origin of human beings. But that's a story for the next episode. So stay tuned for next time. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this podcast, please get out your phone and share it with a friend you think would like it too.